Get out. This place isn't for people like you. The words cut through the room like broken glass, sharp and ugly. The woman who had just stepped into the diner didn't flinch. She adjusted the strap of her travel bag, her face calm but unreadable, and quietly slid into a booth as if the hate-filled voices didn't exist. The other customers turned away awkwardly. Some stared into their coffee cups, some whispered under their breath, and others smirked as though they were entertained by the cruelty. The woman's name was Maya Johnson. She wasn't just any traveler stopping for a hot meal on the way home. She was a decorated United States Marine, a veteran who had spent more nights on foreign soil than in her own bed. She had faced storms of bullets, roadside bombs, and the suffocating fear of not knowing if she'd see another sunrise. And yet here, in her own country, in a place where she wanted nothing more than a plate of eggs and coffee, she was being told she didn't belong. Because of the color of her skin, the group of men who barked at her were gathered near the counter, rough voices and mean grins, their jackets patched with symbols that screamed intolerance. Their leader, a man with a sneer carved into his face, leaned back on his stool and repeated himself louder, as if daring her to move. "Didn't you hear me? We don't serve your kind here. Get up before we make you." Maya stirred the spoon in her coffee slowly. The clink of metal against porcelain was the only sound in the room for a moment. She lifted her eyes, not with anger, not even with fear, but with a steady calm that unsettled them more than yelling ever could. She had learned long ago that silence, when held with dignity, could be sharper than a knife point. One of the men slammed his fist against the counter. The waitress jumped. The other customers stiffened but stayed rooted to their seats. Nobody wanted to challenge the gang. That was how it always worked. The loudest and cruelest controlled the room, while everyone else watched in uneasy silence. Inside Maya's mind, memories flickered. She remembered the dusty streets of a distant village where she had led her squad to rescue civilians trapped under fire. She remembered the sound of helicopters, the heat of desert air, the metallic taste of fear mixed with adrenaline. She remembered pulling a wounded soldier onto her back and carrying him half a mile to safety, ignoring the bullets snapping at her heels. For those acts, she had been decorated, saluted, celebrated by generals. And yet here she was, in a simple diner on American soil, being reduced to "not welcome." The men didn't stop. They hurled slurs that dripped with poison, mocking her, laughing louder each time she didn't react. One leaned over her booth, his breath reeking of cigarettes, his hand reaching for her arm. That was when she moved, not with panic, not with aggression, but with precision. Her voice cut through the air, low and firm. "Take your hand off me. Now." The diner froze. The laughter stopped. Even the jukebox humming faintly in the corner seemed to go quiet. Maya stood slowly, every inch of her posture radiating discipline. She wasn't tall, but she carried herself like someone who had faced death and walked away. Her eyes locked with the man's, steady as steel. He recoiled a little, though he tried to hide it with a mocking chuckle. "Look at you," the leader spat. "Acting tough. You think being stubborn makes you brave? You're just a woman. And the wrong kind at that." For a split second, the room held its breath. Customers shifted uneasily, torn between disgust and cowardice. The waitress clutched her order pad like a shield. Maya reached into her bag slowly, deliberately. The gang members smirked, expecting her to fumble nervously, maybe pull out a phone to call for help. Instead, she pulled out a small, heavy coin and placed it firmly on the table. The sound of metal against wood echoed like a gunshot. That it was a Marine Corps Challenge coin, gleaming under the diner lights. Symbols of courage, service, and sacrifice were etched into its surface, representing countless nights of battle, countless moments when fear had to be swallowed so duty could be fulfilled. Maya's voice was steady, but it carried weight that filled the entire room. "I'm not just a woman. I'm a United States Marine. I've faced enemies with rifles, explosives, and hatred burning in their eyes. Do you think a few loud mouths in a diner scare me? The gang leader blinked, his smirk faltering for the first time. His friends shifted in their seats. A few of the customers gasped softly. For the first time since Maya walked in, the power in the room shifted. The bullies who thrived on intimidation suddenly found themselves face to face with someone who had already stared down worse than they could ever imagine. Maya didn't sit back down. She didn't shrink. She stood tall, her hand resting on the coin as if it were a medal of truth. Her gaze moved across the room, from the men at the counter to the customers who had stayed silent. She wanted them to see not just her, but everything she stood for: discipline, sacrifice, and the unshakable belief that freedom was for everyone, not just a chosen few. The leader tried to laugh again, but the sound rang hollow. His friends avoided her eyes. The once rowdy, jeering group sat in uneasy silence, their swagger unraveling in front of everyone. The diner, moments earlier heavy with tension, was now thick with something else: respect, shame, and the dawning realization that the woman they tried to humiliate was stronger than all of them combined. As the coin glimmered on the table, Maya's words lingered in the air: impossible to ignore, impossible to dismiss. The battle wasn't over, but the balance had shifted. She had revealed who she was, and in doing so, she had stripped their hate of its power, and with that, the first act of her quiet war in that diner came to a close, not with fists, not with violence, but with the undeniable strength of a Marine who refused to bow to hate. The diner was silent after her words, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like everyone was holding their breath at once. For a moment no one moved. The men at the counter who had been so loud and sure of themselves now seemed smaller, their eyes darting to each other, searching for someone to take the lead. The challenge coin on the table gleamed under the dim light, a symbol that none of them could laugh away. Maya didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. Authority came naturally to her, the way it always had when she led Marines into dangerous territory. She spoke evenly, each word carrying weight. She told them that bravery wasn't about barking threats in a diner, it was about facing real danger and protecting lives, even when those lives belonged to strangers. She explained how, in the battlefield, skin color, gender, and background never mattered. What mattered was trust, loyalty, and courage. She shared how she fought alongside people from every walk of life, and how those bonds, formed in fire and blood, were stronger than any hatred could ever be. Her voice didn't tremble, but there was emotion behind it, controlled, deep, undeniable. She had carried brothers and sisters through smoke and chaos, and she had buried too many of them to let a pack of hateful men reduce her to a stereotype. I've served this country, she told them, her eyes locked on the gang leader, and I've protected the freedom of people like you, even when you wouldn't protect mine. You don't scare me. You shame me, because you remind me of the battles we still have to fight at home. The leader tried to smirk again, but his confidence was gone. He muttered something under his breath, but it came out weak, nothing like the bold insults from before. One of the younger men beside him looked down at the floor, shame flickering in his eyes. He had joined in the taunts earlier, but now he couldn't even look at Maya. The silence broke when an older man near the back of the diner slowly rose to his feet. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice was clear as he spoke. "Marine," he said, nodding firmly, "thank you for your service." He raised his hand to his forehead in a salute. It was an act of respect, simple but powerful. Others in the diner stirred, their guilt visible in their faces. Some murmured words of support, others just nodded. The spell of fear and silence was broken. The waitress, who had been frozen with indecision earlier, came forward with a plate of food and placed it in front of Maya with deliberate care. Her voice was steady now as she said, "You're welcome here. Always." That small act carried more weight than anyone expected. It was a choice, a clear stand against the ugliness that had filled the room moments before. The gang leader scoffed, but his voice lacked the force it once had. He muttered to his group to get up. A couple of them obeyed immediately, uneasy under the stares of the other customers. But the youngest of the gang lingered, shifting uncomfortably. He looked at Maya, then at the coin on the table, and finally muttered something almost too quiet to hear. "I'm sorry." It wasn't much, but it was more than anyone expected. He followed the others out, leaving behind the weight of what had just happened. Maya sat down again, calm as ever, and began to eat her meal. Each bite carried a sense of quiet victory, not over the men who left but over the poison they carried. She didn't need them to apologize, though the words from the youngest one had cracked through the wall of hate. What mattered was that she had stood her ground. She had refused to be pushed out, refused to bow to their smallness. As she ate, her mind turned inward. She thought about the contradiction of her life, how she had risked everything for her country, only to return and face the same old hate that had always tried to push her down. Yet she also thought about the waitress who served her with kindness, the veteran who saluted her, the mother who had whispered to her child about real bravery. Hate was loud, but it wasn't the only voice. When she finished her meal and stood to leave, the veteran who had saluted her walked to the door and held it open. His eyes shone with gratitude as he said quietly, "They'll remember this. You showed them what strength looks like." Maya nodded with a small smile, her shoulders straight, her step steady. Outside, the cool air brushed her face. The night felt clearer somehow, as if the storm inside that diner had passed. She knew racism wasn't gone, that it wouldn't vanish overnight, but she also knew that every time someone stood their ground, it weakened the hold of hate just a little more. She didn't need to win every battle. She just needed to keep showing up, keep refusing to leave when hate told her to go. As she walked toward her car, her thoughts became a quiet reflection. She remembered her fallen comrades, those who had never come home. She remembered their laughter, their bravery, the way they leaned on each other when the world seemed impossible. She carried them with her always, and tonight, she carried them into that diner. She imagined them standing with her, invisible but present, reminding her that courage doesn't end on the battlefield. It continues in moments like these, in everyday places where dignity is tested. Driving away, she thought of the young man who had whispered his apology. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a crack in the armor of hate. Maybe he would think twice the next time, maybe he would walk away from men like that leader. Change started small, but it had to start somewhere. The road stretched ahead, endless and quiet. Maya smiled faintly to herself. She hadn't raised a hand, she hadn't shouted, and yet she had won a battle that mattered. She had reminded everyone in that diner that strength isn't in cruelty or fear, it's in standing firm with dignity. Her story wasn't just about racism. It was about courage, about refusing to let anyone else define your worth, about proving that respect and equality belong to all people. It was about showing that sometimes the most powerful fight isn't against bullets or bombs, but against prejudice in the places closest to home. And as she drove into the night, the words seemed to echo in her mind, words she would carry with her always. The greatest battles are not always fought abroad, they are fought right here, in the moments when you choose to stand tall, to refuse to leave, and to remind the world that hate will never decide where you belong.